Greetings, this is Dave Baran with Honeycomb Digital Investments. It's October 12th. I'm here with Professor Carol Goforth and Chief Investment Officer Baxter Hines. One of the things that there's a rumor going around at the moment that the White House is thinking about issuing an executive order to determine what agency, what regulatory body is actually going to govern crypto transactions, cryptocurrencies, digital currency, security tokens, utility tokens, commodity tokens, all of these different digital assets. The entities that are out there that already exist, we've got the CFTC, the SEC, the IRS, FINRA, we've got the US Treasury, we've got the FDIC. We have all of this alphabet soup. The question is, who is actually going to take the lead? Are people going to be working in tandem? Are they going to be working holding hands? Baxter, what do you think?
Well, Dave, it's a tough question. I'll start by saying that, and I'll also start with saying that it's something that needs to happen. I think the government needs to kind of get the ball rolling with digital. And there are members of Congress, members of different agencies throughout Washington who theoretically should have the authority to regulate these new digital assets, but they haven't really set as much in motion as people would like. And that uncertainty is something that the market loathes. It creates another level of risk around all of these tokens in terms of their price. It also prevents adoption in a way that I would like to see. More people would use these assets, and more enterprises especially, if they could get some kind of definition around what are the ground rules of getting into this new realm, so to speak. And it's been complicated. In my book, I wrote about how the Swiss regulatory body, FINMA, they made a groundbreaking announcement several years ago where they actually defined three different buckets of crypto. They said there are payment tokens, which Bitcoin would fall into. They said there are utility tokens where the coin actually derives its value by the usage of the coin itself. And then the third bucket was for security tokens, so putting things like stocks or bonds or what we would think of as regulated types of instruments onto a distributed ledger and using blockchain technology to track and trace its ownership. And that was a big stance. But the more you sort of peel the onion back, you realize that these digital currencies, because of their nature, you can package them and write code to make them do multiple different things. And so it really is hard to make everything fit into its proper space. And so what I continue to see is politicians showing interest in what's going on in the digital world. I think they've seen that there is just this tremendous group of people who have money, time, emotional attachment even to these new cryptos and digital assets. And so they're taking interest. But like, I was at a conference in Austin last week for the Texas Blockchain Council, and there were 3 U.S. senators talking there, Senator Lummis from Wyoming, Senator Cruz, and Senator Cornyn from Texas. There was a representative from Ohio, Warren Davidson, and then you had Hester Pierce. So it was a star-studded type of group. And I kept getting this idea from them that, again, yes, they're interested, but they don't really know enough about it. They want to hear our feedback. And so my fear is that some of these agencies are maybe looking to Congress or the SEC to do something, but nobody really knows who has the authority to actually make the rules. And so there isn't the traction that I'd like to see for things unfolding in terms of getting hard and fast legislation or agency law developed around this stuff. And I can't even tell you exactly what's needed. And that's why we got the expert here, Carol. Why don't we hand it over to you and get your opinion?
Okay, I think you're absolutely right that one of the problems is that this is an incredibly complicated asset class that can serve multiple functions. It can serve as a currency substitute. It can serve as a substitute, a tokenized way to handle things that were traditionally in conventional stocks and bonds and debt instruments. The problem is that intuitively, it makes sense to think that this should be an asset class that is governed by an agency, that there ought to be something like FINMA that tells us it's going to be handled this way or this way or this way. In fact, the way we have divided up regulatory authority, you really do have a scenario and a situation where all of that alphabet soup of agencies has a legitimate basis for saying, I've got jurisdiction over a piece of the crypto asset, crypto transaction pie. For example, virtually all of the convertible crypto assets that are out there can be used as a substitute for currency, either as a store of value or a medium of exchange, and consequently they run the risk of facilitating money laundering or the payment into a criminal enterprise. Because of that risk, I see no reasonable possibility that anybody is going to take away FinCEN's jurisdiction under the Bank Secrecy Act to require registration as money services businesses, to require compliance with anti-money laundering requirements and the know your customer KYC requirements. I just don't see that as feasible. Similarly, because there is money to be made on the part of the holders, the IRS is not going to give up its claim to a share of your earnings, of your profits. So the IRS is going to have a piece of this pie too. For a lot of people, the most confusing is this, should it be the CFTC, the Commodities Future Trading Commission, or should it be the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission? And the answer there too is, honestly, it's not an either or question. If you have a security, the SEC is responsible for both regulating and enforcing the way in which securities are registered, the way in which they are traded, the exemptions that are available, the ongoing reporting requirements. They have the responsibility for developing rules around anything that fits within any of the categories of securities. The CFTC regulates any derivative, any futures contract, anything that's a transaction in an option, a swap, something that's not actually selling the commodity, but a derivative product, even derivatives on securities. So even if a crypto is a security, the CFTC has regulatory authority over the derivatives, and it has enforcement authority. That is, it can apply its anti-fraud rules to trades in the actual market of the underlying commodity, Bitcoin, for example. So really, I think we are in a system where unless we could suddenly convince folks to combine the CFTC and the SEC, which has been unsuccessfully lobbied for before, I think you're going to see all of these agencies retain authority over part of the pie. And when you talk about the Department of Treasury, they're going to have special concerns about things like asset classes that involve stable coins and things where they are using the US dollar and the way that banks interact with crypto assets. So you are going to see all of these regulatory authorities needing to figure out how to handle their mission, their frame of reference with regard to this incredibly complicated and rapidly evolving area. Because if you talked a few years ago, things like NFTs and the Lind product really weren't on people's mind, and boy, they sure are now.
No doubt. I mean, listening to what you're saying, and I was particularly caught up with the idea around the derivatives going over to the CFTC. You could technically say a stable coin is a derivative. I mean, couldn't you? I mean, it's not the currency itself, but it's a representation of that currency. And so
derivatives are, in the context of the CFTC, are kind of specially defined. So it is a derived financial transaction where you are selling an interest in a particular commodity, a thing of value, where the actual transaction, where the transfer takes place at some point in the future, or is contemplated that really it's never going to happen. You're just betting on that the future price is going to be higher or lower than what it is right now. So yes, stablecoins derive their value from an underlying asset, most commonly the US dollar. But that's not what derivative in the context of the CFTC really means.
Mm.
Terms of art, which makes it, a very complicated area for ordinary people to get a handle on.
The other sort of piece of this, and I think it's something that's been in the news, recently as well. Some countries making digital assets, illegal, which, when you're talking about the world of digital assets and how they function, right? This isn't a physical item that a government can come and necessarily confiscate. How do the regulatory agencies of the United States of America, how do they line up and either enforce, like I suppose they want to be enforcing other jurisdictions, laws, but they certainly have to jive in some form or fashion with what another massive economy may be doing, or maybe regulating, or maybe trying to govern when it comes to digital assets, right? I'm thinking about China in particular. How would that fit in? Let's just assume that these regulatory agencies that we're talking about actually do now regulate or do now govern in this space. How do they do so when there is a massive economy on the planet that says all of this is illegal?
Well, China says it's illegal. It's illegal in China, and it's illegal for Chinese citizens. China doesn't purport to say it's illegal if you're an American in America. In terms of nations that are really, really insistent on applying their laws around the world, we're probably the most aggressive. So we take a Russian exchange platform and we say, you facilitated trading by Americans with banned countries on our OFAC list, our Office of Foreign Asset Control, and we're going to fine you, which they just did, a few weeks ago. And they are saying to Binance and BitMEX and other major players and the world crypto, you are not complying with US requirements. And we don't pay a whole lot of attention to whether or not these platforms are in compliance with the laws of other jurisdictions. We look at, are you facilitating transactions with US folks? If you are you complying with US law?
No, that's good to know. It's it's a good position for our country to be in when it comes to providing capital and investment and having free markets, right?
It's a mixed bag, because when the US, flexes its regulatory muscle, it engenders resentment. It encourages other nations to flex their muscles too. It also, it perversely is a disincentive to harmonization. In an ideal world, in which I know we do not live, but if we did, you'd have one set of regulations around the globe. You'd have because really we are moving so quickly towards a global economy, and crypto assets, blockchain, that's one part of that movement towards being truly interconnected. And if we had a single uniform set of rules and standards, traceability would be easier, cooperation would be easier, anti-money laundering standards would be enforced uniformly. It would be, from the standpoint of entrepreneurs, hey, I know what's required. I don't have to comply with US and Canadian and Australian and Singapore and Switzerland. I've got one set of rules. That would be the ideal world, not the world we live in.
Mr. Hines, Baxter, anything else to add?
No, I think, we're just going to have to wait and see how things unfold here in the US. I think we'll continue to be the leader in terms of, regulation. amongst the major economies. I still think that smaller countries will probably go ahead of us, but in terms of the big European, U.S., China, Japan, the U.S. is still going to set the pace in the end, and so we're going to have to watch, what comes out of Washington. No getting around it.
Baxter, Carol, always a pleasure.
Indeed.
Thank you again.
Thank you.